Batman has easily the most famous rogues gallery in comic book history, and when you look at his biggest villains, they usually represent a very specific, grounded kind of psychological breakdown. The Joker's pure chaos in the clown suit. Two-Face is a broken conscience, split right down the middle. The Riddler is just an insecure narcissist who desperately needs everyone to think he's the smartest guy in the room. For the most part, they're just deeply broken human beings with a gimmick. Then you look down into the sewers of Gotham and you see something that completely breaks the mold. A towering, grotesque mountain of living sludge. A roaring monster that can turn his hands into massive axes, absorb bullets like water, and tear through concrete walls like wet tissue paper. This is Clayface, and to a casual reader, he looks like a totally generic creature. The kind of powerhouse boss a writer throws into a story just because Batman needs something big and heavy to punch for a few pages. And while he does fit that role, if you stop looking at the mud and actually look at the man trapped inside, Clayface is one of the most tragic figures in Gotham. He's an artist whose obsession with his own face turned him into a walking nightmare. He's a shapeshifter who can become anyone on Earth except the one person he desperately wants to be, himself. But here's the twist that most people have no idea about. The heartbreaking, definitive version of Clayface that everyone grew up with didn't actually exist in the original comics. He's a total Frankenstein creation. Television producers looked at decades of messy comic book history, realized the writers had completely botched the character, and smashed two entirely different guys together to create a masterpiece. To understand how we got here, we have to go back to 1940. This is the golden age of comics. Batman has only been around for, about a year? And his creators are pulling ideas from the biggest pop culture trends of the era. And in 1940, nothing was bigger than the Universal horror movies. That's where we get Basil Karlo. His name was a dead giveaway, nodding directly to horror icons, Basil Rathbone and Boris Karloff. In the DC universe, Karlo was a brilliant, incredibly handsome actor back in the silent film era, famous for playing terrifying monsters under layers of heavy makeup. But Karlo had a massive flaw. His entire identity was tied to his face, his youth, and his stardom. And as the years rolled on, Hollywood did what Hollywood always does. Sound came to movies, tech advanced, and the studios moved on to younger, fresher talent. Karlo was left behind, rotting away in his own bitterness. The breaking point comes when he opens the morning paper and finds out the studio is remaking his masterpiece horror film, The Terror. And they didn't even invite him back for a cameo. Instead, they replaced him with a hot new star. Something in his mind completely snaps. He doesn't have superpowers or magic blood, he's just a desperate, aging guy who refuses to let his legacy fade away. So he sneaks into the old studio prop department, steals the creepy clay mask worn by the villain of his original movie, a character named Clayface, grabs a real dagger, and decides that if they're going to remake his movie, they're going to do it in blood. He starts stalking the set at night, murdering the cast and crew, one by one in the exact order they die in the script. For 20 years, that was Clayface. No superpowers, no supernatural sludge, just a human serial killer in a prop mask, killing out of pure, pathetic vanity. He was a great slasher villain born decades before Halloween or Friday the 13th ever hit theaters. But he had a huge problem for a comic book story. He was just a guy with a knife. Eventually, a guy with a knife isn't a threat to the world's greatest detective. Batman could just punch him in the jaw and the comic was over. By the time the 1960s rolled around, pop culture shifted hard. Horror movies were out, and wacky, high-concept sci-fi was in. Comic writers didn't want grounded serial killers anymore. They wanted giant monsters for Batman to trade punches with. So DC completely rebooted the name and introduced a brand new character, Matt Hagen. Hagen had absolutely nothing in common with the original actor. He wasn't artistic, and he didn't care about legacy. He was just a rugged, cynical treasure hunter looking for a quick payday. While diving in an uncharted underwater cave, he stumbles across a strange, glowing pool of radioactive protoplasm. He falls into the slime, and when he crawls out, his genetic code is completely rewritten. His flesh becomes living, breathing, malleable mud. For the first time, Clayface actually has superpowers. He can grow to the size of a small building, harden his arms into stone mallets, and mimic any face he looks at. On paper, this was exactly what the publishers wanted, but in reality, the character lost some of its soul. Matt Hagen didn't have a compelling psychological motive. He didn't have a tragic backstory. He was just a generic crook who used godlike shape-shifting powers to rob local banks and steal bags of cash. He was a spectacular monster, but a really boring character. By the 1990s, DC had a broken villain on their hand. You had Basil Karlo, a fascinating actor with no powers, and Matt Hagen, a giant mud monster with no personality. For decades, Clayface was stuck in limbo, as a second-tier bad guy who couldn't carry a story on his own. Until 1992, when Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski sat down to reinvent Gotham for Batman the Animated Series, they looked at this messy history and had a stroke of genius. They realized they didn't have to choose between the actor and the monster. They could take the tragic soul of the actor, trap it inside the powerhouse body of the mud monster, and build something completely new. In the show, they kept the name Matt Hagen, but threw out the goofy 1960s treasure hunter gimmick. Instead, they made him a beloved movie star hiding a horrific secret. Hagen had been in a brutal car crash that completely disfigured his face, threatening to kill his career. Desperate to save his livelihood, he cuts a deal with a shady corporate billionaire named Roland Daggett. Daggett gives him an experimental cosmetic cream called Renew. It's a miracle drug. When Hagen rubs it on, his skin becomes completely soft, letting him literally sculpt his face back into his handsome movie star self. But the cream is a trap. It's highly toxic, and worse, it's intensely addictive. If Hagen goes too long without a dose, his face begins to melt like warm plastic. He becomes a literal slave to the executives who control his supply, forced to commit crimes just to keep his face from sliding off his skull. The horror hits its peak when Hagen tries to push back. In a scene that pushed the absolute limits of what was allowed on a kids' TV show, Daggett's thugs pin Hagen down and forcefully pour an entire industrial vat of chemicals down his throat. They didn't just kill his career, they flooded his biology. He can be anyone he wants, Bruce Wayne, the President, Batman himself, but he can no longer hold his own true form. In one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the animation, he tries to force his face back into his handsome actor self, just to prove he's still there, but his body collapses under its own weight. This TV version was so brilliant and so universally loved that the comic books eventually had to surrender. The writers at DC realized Hollywood had beaten them at their own game. To fix it, they brought back the original 1940s actor, Basil Karlo. They had him pull off a desperate plot where he stole the genetic tissue of the other mud monsters and injected it into his own veins. Karlo finally got his superpowers, mutating into the definitive giant of living sludge we see in the comics today. For the last several years, Basil has carried the mantle, even trying to reform and work with Batman for a while, before the sheer agonizing madness of his melting mind dragged him right back into the dark. And that brings us today. If you step into a comic shop right now, Basil Karlo is firmly established as the one true Clayface. In fact, DC is currently launching a brand new psychological horror comic called Clayface Celebrity Dirt, where an escaped Basil Karlo discovers a body double has completely stolen his identity and his acting career while he was locked away in Arkham. But if you look over at Hollywood, the cycle of identity theft is about to happen all over again. Warner Brothers has greenlit a standalone R-rated Clayface movie directed by James Watkins. But for this film, they aren't using Basil Karlo, they're using the name Matt Hagen. But they are keeping the tragic actor origin story. It's kind of an endless loop. Comics invent a character, TV steals the backstory of one and gives it to the name of another. The comics change their lore to match the TV show, and then a new movie comes out along and mixes the names up all over again. Honestly, there's probably no better tribute to Clayface than the fact that his real-world publication history is just as unstable and shifting as the mud he's made of. A monster born from vanity, trapped inside a prison of his own flesh, reminding us that the scariest villains aren't the ones who want to destroy the world, but the ones who just want to look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. At the end of the day, Clayface isn't just a monster made of mud. He's a mirror. He's a warning about what happens when we let our obsession with how the world sees us consume who we actually are. In a rogues gallery filled with psychopaths and geniuses, he remains one of Batman's more tragic villains. But while Clayface is still trying to figure out who he is, I know exactly who we are. Before we wrap up today, I have to take a second to say a massive, heartfelt thank you to all of you. We just officially crossed 5,000 subscribers on the channel. Honestly, when I started doing these deep dives into the corners of comic history, I never expected 5,000 of you to jump into the long box with me. Thank you for every single view, comment, and like. You guys are making this dream a reality. If you want to support the channel directly, consider hitting that join button right next to the subscribe button to become an official channel member. You'll get your name in future videos, badges, and a direct hand in keeping this channel alive. Let me know in the comments what you think of the upcoming Clayface movie. Hit like if you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.